Christ-centered education to me is more than just slapping Christ on the traditional model. Christ-centered education has to do with how we raise our children essentially and what the goals and values are of the system. So when we put together an approach to education, we think of it from the ground up as to how would God want our kid to learn how to do life. And so it's more than just doing a traditional curriculum and throwing a Bible study on in the morning. It has to do with integrating a Christ conversation throughout subject areas, throughout grade levels, throughout the day. And that everything is processed through a filter of how do Christians react to that? What does the Bible say about that? And it's not just something you do for devotions in the morning, it's something you do all the way across. So the Portals approach to curriculum is read, think, do. We read the classics. We have questions for parents and teachers to ask for assessment and to see if they've captured what they've read. And then do, we actually go to a project with it later.
The Portals approach to curriculum, I think, is quite similar to the way that God often teaches us. He asks us to hear and read His Word, and He asks us to meditate on it, think about it, discuss it with our community, and then He calls us to go out into all the world and do it.
There was a model that we see in the scriptures that Jesus used to teach His disciples. We should be thinking more like that when we raise our children. So our approach to all lesson planning is that they're designed around the principle of read, think, and do. Portals values a Christ-centered education that's rigorous and playful. So what we're looking for is not only a lot of the literature-based curriculum in the homeschool community has been really effective at reinvigorating a rigorous kind of education that you're going to do massive amounts of reading. Your typical government school might have a child reading 2-3 books a year by the time they hit middle school. We have kids reading 20 to 30 books a year in most homeschool settings. The capacity of most children to consume a large amount of information is well beyond a standardized kind of content that's going on in schools today. So one of the things we see as a benefit, one of the things we value is returning to a model of school where we actually expect things of kids. We expect hard work and rigor from kids. On the flip side of that, we think we're going to get that hard work and rigor because with everything they learn, there's a playful side to it. So I'm not just learning because I have a test to take, I'm learning because there's a project this afternoon that I need to get ready to do. So with every piece of reading we have a think about it component and we have a do component. So we value in education that balance between high academic achievement when it comes to content and structured content that's been provided, but also an innovative side of doing projects, field trips, interviews, where students go out into the world and see those things in practice. So that creates a curricular conundrum. How do you create curriculum that across the board for 12 years across all subject areas is rooted in, I read about it, I think about it, and then I do something with it? Well, that eliminates a lot of projects that we do in schools that really never happen in the real world. But it also brings back a lot of projects that we actually do in the real world that have somehow been erased from schools. Things like figuring out how to do a mortgage. Things like paying your taxes are basic tasks in the world today that we have. Most kids don't understand how their HVAC system works. Well, that seems to be a lapse in education. If I don't know how to fix plumbing and electricity in my own home, I now am at the whim of whoever I need to hire to do that. So we believe in an education where you're actually learning the things you need to learn to be successful in life, while learning more about your character, your values, and your God-given gifts and talents that you should be able to take into the world with you. Our approach to curriculum is to start with 50 years of high-quality homeschool content, select the best of that content, which has risen out of that free market, and then to put it together into a 144-day lesson plan sequence. We want for every parent to go in there and then also find supplemental resources for each day and each lesson across every subject area, K through 12. So when we put that together, we do it with a scope and sequence that is both thematic and that is driven by rigorous, classic, traditional texts that you would see and have seen throughout education. So the Greek classics, the fairy tales for little kids, famous novels that you've heard of for older kids. We want our kids exposed to the great literature of our age.
provide our students with amazing texts that have stood the test of time, that have inspiring characters, and most importantly, have real truths and values that we want to encourage our students to take on and apply in their own lives.
Reading, however, doesn't just have to be print text. Reading can also be watching a play. Reading can be hearing the audio of that. So when it comes to a lot of reading disorders and reading disabilities, we've found that opening up multimodal options to the text, if the text or the ideas in the are what's important, then the mode that you learn it in is really open. That's the reading.
The texts that we provide are like great pieces of artwork. But a great piece of artwork, if it's not hung up on the wall, displayed, thought about, it's meaningless. And we don't want text to be like that. So by thinking, discussing them, we pull meaning, we make meaning out of those beautiful pieces that the artist has put together. Or in this case, the authors, the writers.
When it comes to think, we really try to scale it according to like different taxonomies of learning. So it's not just about knowledge questions where I'm checking to see if you've read the content. It's also about evaluation and analysis and synthesis of ideas. So you're making connections between the different readings that you're doing in a day. This is a piece that in traditional schools is usually the test or the assessment that goes with it. When you're in face-to-face education and you want to know if a kid understands what they read, ask them.
We provide discussion questions for our students to actually discuss it with their instructors so that they actually take something away from it.
So the think about it is a set of questions that we give to parents that would be prompts. So they don't have to have read Pride and Prejudice to have some key questions to ask where kids can think about what they've read. But it's the responsibility is on the student to explain what they've just read to the adult, even at kindergarten.
That's what I loved the most in my English classes. My teachers would ask us to read a classic. I would finish the classic and I'd be like, oh, that was a great book. I'm ready to move on. But then they would really have us talk about it, and suddenly all this beauty and depth would come out of it. And that's what we want for our students as well, that every book that they read, they don't just enjoy it, but they actually take away the meaning. But that comes through discussion and thinking about it, and a loving instructor to guide them in that and push them and challenge them to actually think about what they've been reading.
Then we have do. The idea of do is that you tell the brain, this is important for me to remember by doing something with the content.
If you think back to your own educational experience, more than likely you're going to think about the projects that you did, the things you spent time on, that you put your value and heart into. Those things you remember because you did pour so much of yourself into them. Same thing, to have memorable experiences that really help them attain that information.
Cognitively, this is great for the brain. If you read something and you just talk about it for a while and then move on, you're telling your brain it's not that important. But when you read it, talk about it, and then do something with it, you're telling your brain this is important and I want to remember it. So current brain research would say that whenever you're trying to learn something, you should be actively doing something with what you've learned, and that's how we remember things long term versus short term. Then you'd say, well, what if you got content where you can't actually do anything with it? Well, our approach to learning is then why are we learning it? If it's not relevant, you can't do anything with it. If it's not significant in any way, maybe it shouldn't be part of the curriculum. The other part of the do when we approach it with curriculum is that the projects are designed so that they're age level appropriate. So we look at cognitive growth through time for kids, and we want to make sure that those projects are really honed in on where that brain development is at for each child. So at the younger ages, we're looking at foundational sorts of material, but by middle school, we're looking at cognitive thinking, debate, argument, and then by high school, we're looking at leadership and ministry. Portals does multi-age education. We like when younger kids can grow in humility because they see older kids in the room with them. We like when older kids can grow in service because they see kids that need help. And so we only have 4 levels. We have our early elementary, which we call founders, which are learning foundational skills so that they can perform in a school environment. Growers are developing those skills so that they can become thinkers, which is our middle school group. And our thinkers are actually applying those cognitively and looking at things outside their world a little more. Where with our high school age, what we call leaders, they're actually focused more on ministry and calling, like how are they going to live their lives. So at those 4 different levels, students will spend multiple years at the same level with looped curriculum. This gives us one more benefit. As we loop the curriculum, that means that every 3 years, you're doing American history, ancient world history, or modern world history. So they're covering the same contents, but with different levels of tasks that go with it. So that creates an environment where you get multiple ages or smaller schools all working together at the same time. So when our elementary kids are doing the American Revolution, so are our high school kids. And so thematically, the curriculum works together and it fits together because we've built it together. And that's different than even your mainstream traditional schools where the subject areas are chopped up and the age levels are chopped up. We bring them all back together so it's one system. And that takes a lot of stress off the system too.
Something that is different from other programs is that we love feedback. Now, other programs, they love feedback as well, but they can't change things as quickly as Portals can. You might purchase their curriculum, purchase a book, and give some feedback. You didn't like one section, a piece of it didn't really work well, the instructions were weird, and you might never get to see that fixed. It might be 10 years down the road before they republish that book. But with Portals, we have an automatic feedback loop. If there's an error or something could be clarified, made a little more clear, we can do that immediately through our digital lesson plans, and it will change for everybody. So it just takes one parent to say, hey, this is off, and if we see it and we're like, yeah, that could be better, we can immediately fix it. We also gather ongoing feedback. So over the course of an entire year, we want feedback on every single book, every single project, so that by the time the next year comes around, we've got the best projects available. So it doesn't take 10 years to see those changes. You can get immediate feedback.